This past summer, while you were at the beach or forensics camp, I spent 2 weeks doing something that I truly love. I went to GMIM, the George Mason Institute of Miming, a comprehensive camp about the art of street mimes. I learned all the tricks of the trade, from walking the dog to walking down an invisible flight of stairs. But perhaps the greatest trick I learned was the classic, being trapped inside a box. It was awesome. After years of trying to live outside the box, I had some time to live inside the box. And what I found was that living inside the box made everything easier. The limits of my box actually helped me focus and keep out all the distractions of the outside world. However, as much as I loved and appreciated the limits of my box, there are plenty of others who feel it's better to work and live free from all restraints. We've even begun to believe that restrictions on our thinking process prevent creativity. Catchy slogans like "think outside the box" imply that if we want to succeed and solve our problems, then we need to free ourselves completely from limitations. In a society that stresses thinking outside the box, we seek to remove limitations based on an assumption that limitations are bad. But that's an assumption that needs to be questioned today. Yahoo CEO Marissa Mayer argues that constraints shape and focus problems, as well as provide inspiration. Having limitations is crucial in order for success to follow. To examine the benefits of limitations, let's first take a look at how thinking outside the box can actually place us at a disadvantage. Then, we'll learn how thinking inside the box can improve our problem-solving skills. And finally, we'll learn to appreciate what it means to think inside the box. Now, I get it. Think outside the box. It's catchy. And we love phrases that are catchy. Unfortunately, thinking outside the box won't actually help us catch the right idea. As we move out of the box and remove its restraints, we remove one of the great advantages that we have in approaching any task or problem. Limitations in our thought process prevent what columnist Belle Cooper calls a paralysis of choice in her article, The Psychology of Limitations. She explains how we've all experienced moments where we've been paralyzed by multiple opportunities. For me, I can recall a trip to the local candy store where I spent so much time trying to decide what to get that my sister ended up buying the last Tootsie Pop. I cried for 2 hours. But that was last Wednesday. Today, psychologists are starting to examine the validity of thinking outside the box. Psychology Today's article, Stimulating Imagination Through Constraints, questions the benefits of thinking outside the box by explaining that for most children and most adults, such an open-ended task is altogether unmanageable and frustrating. I was certainly frustrated when there were no more Tootsie Pops left for me, but it was more frustrating when a 6-year-old in line behind me said, "That's just wrong." And my violent sobs in a candy store aren't the only things described as wrong. Outside-the-box thinking may lead us to look in the wrong place for our solution. In her book, Creativity from Constraints, Patricia Stokes explains that when people are given free rein to solve a problem, they tend to be wholly uncreative, focusing on what's worked best in the past. World-renowned architect Frank Gehry credits the limits placed on his buildings as the source of his creativity. Once when he was commissioned to design a house, he was given 0 constraints. After spending days examining possible routes to take, he suffered from a paralysis of choice and ended up having to create limitations just so that he could have a final blueprint. He states, "It's better to have some problem to work on. I think we turn those constraints into action." Gehry demonstrated that creativity exists when a person meets and overcomes a challenge. Even for a professional architect like Gehry, someone who dedicates their life to designing and constructing beautiful works of art, limitations keep their work in check and their mind at ease. But what would the world be like without limitations? I mean, if we really enjoyed talking in front of people while wearing suits, We can. Why not talk for 20 minutes? 30 minutes? There's no time limit. Judges, put that stopwatch away. And parents, what's with this whole potty training thing? Limiting a young child to a plastic toilet? That's just degrading. Recently, I was left in charge of my younger brother. I didn't want to watch him, so I told him, I don't have any rules for you. Do whatever you want. He proceeded to take his clothes off and run down the neighborhood naked. He's 13. Do we really want to live in a world as chaotic as that? Although these limitations sometimes seem unfair, well, maybe not for my brother. True creativity and problem solving are found when we recognize the limitations that we have and we strive to work with them to obtain success. If we take a look at history, we'll find that many of the greatest artists, musicians, and writers worked with the forms and constraints that existed for them and were known for simply being the best at what they did. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was the greatest composer of the classical era. His style of music was the same as his contemporaries, but Mozart excelled because he was able to craft the greatest pieces in the style of his era. J. Robert Oppenheimer successfully created the first atomic weapon, despite having similar technology as the Germans or Russians. He achieved success because Oppenheimer was the bomb! Man, I really nuked that joke. Even the greatest writer of the English language, William Shakespeare, worked with constraints to craft beautiful masterpieces. Shakespeare excelled in writing sonnets, which consist of 14 lines and follow a strict structure and rhyme scheme. Using these specific guidelines, Shakespeare wrote 154 sonnets. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Works with the ladies every time. Many of us have experienced moments where we had to work around the limits we had. An example much closer to home for me would be my uncle. After serving his country in Vietnam, my uncle found work where he could, in a fast food restaurant. Although it wasn't the most luxurious job, it helped him make ends meet. As an assistant manager, he soon discovered that the restaurant was losing customers because their chicken wasn't up to the standards of competitors. My uncle recognized that this problem had to be solved in order for the company to improve. Working around the fact that he could only use his kitchen, on a tight budget, working after running the restaurant all day, my uncle and a business partner of his created a new recipe, which was an immediate hit. In return for his recipe, the corporation gave him several restaurants to own and operate. My uncle, a young Italian boy from South Philadelphia, sold his recipe for fried chicken to KFC. And you thought it was just Colonel Sanders. So, to improve our problem solving and our thought process in general, we need to move away from the idea of outside the box. In her article, Thinking Inside the Box, Michelle Root Bernstein suggests that creativity isn't necessarily about getting out of the box. Sometimes, it's about staying inside the box long enough to rethink and restate constraints, to reconceive and explore its almost infinite possibilities. The great advantage is that by staying inside the box and working with its rules, you have complete assurance that every solution you reach solves the problem at hand. Columnist Ray Sheen from the Harvard Business Review gives us 3 steps to effectively think within the box. Look, ask, and study. First, we must look at ourselves and the problem at hand. We should look at how we're approaching the problem, and look at how we've approached our problems in the past. Second, we must ask ourselves, why are we reaching a solution? Why are we experiencing trouble now, when in the past, we could reach a solution? And finally, we must study our past solutions and study how others have achieved success in similar situations. If we combine these 3 steps, we can effectively think within the box. Now, I'm no Shakespeare, and I'm no Marcel Marceau. And okay, maybe there really isn't a G. Mim, but for all of us, life is composed of limitations, invisible boxes. We can't choose these limitations. We have to live with them. So the next time that you have a problem you can't solve,
Try thinking inside the box. It may look restricting from the outside. You could have more room than you